colonnade is a gigantic construction here in Karnak Temple in Luxor city. It's the hall of columns. It's composed of 134 gigantic columns built by King Ramesses II. His cartouche is carved on each single column here. There used to be a ceiling covering all this hall, and prayers were held inside this hall as well.
The colonnade is the biggest hypostyle hall in the whole world and the greatest building ever built to serve a religious purpose. Its total area is 5,016.7 square meters, 52 meters long and 103 meters wide. Its ceiling rests on 134 columns built with sandstone. They are lined in 16 rows. Each column represents a papyrus flower with an open capital. The two rows in the middle reach 22.4 meters high. Each column's diameter is 3 meters and a half, and its perimeter is more than 10 meters. The height of the capital only is 3 meters and a half, and its perimeter at the top is 5 meters and a half. The apex above the capital weighs 70 tons. It is said that 100 men can stand over one capital. It's believed that King Amenophes III constructed the middle main rows, which are composed of 12 gigantic columns. As for the other 122 columns, they were erected by King Seti I, organized in 14 rows, 7 on each side of the hall. Each column represents bud papyrus flower with closed capital and measures 17 meters. The difference in height between the middle and the side rows is 8 meters, filled with great stone windows that allows light to enter into the hall in an accurate calculated way to illuminate the middle way, which is the path of the gods' procession. The colonnade has puzzled the engineers as much as it did to the ordinary visitor. One wonders, how could the Egyptian build these gigantic columns without acquiring modern technology? Harris Papyrus, that was written by King Ramesses III, mentioned an unbelievable number of statues that were dedicated to Ammon in Karnak Temple. But with the great 20th century discovery of the cache in the temple, this number seems reasonable, for the number of statues discovered by Legrand in 1902 was 17,000 statues. Some statues were found broken like these two black basalt statues, but others were fine pieces of art. The Sphinx of King Thutmose III is a great example of the perfectly sculptured royal statues. The lady statue represents his wife, Queen Isis. God Horus is that unique celestial god who is a main member of the Osirian family, being the son of God Osiris, the god of the dead, and who has reached a popular level of worshipness that was unmatched in the Egyptian history. Taweret is a protective goddess of the women in labor. Her name means the great. She is represented in the form of a female hippo with huge breasts, lion claws, and a crocodile's tail. King Ramesses II statue was cut out of marble. Here he kneels to present offerings to the god. He is not the only king who has a headless statue. King Thutmose III too owns a black granite statue without a head. These statues were placed in massive numbers, apparently in a hurry, by the priests who wanted to protect and preserve the valuable images of their pharaohs, even if they had to hide them under the ground. The 8th pylon of Karnak Temple was built by Queen Hatshepsut, but was usurped later by King Thutmose III. The 9th and 10th pylons were constructed by King Horemheb, using the dismantled stones of the earlier temple of Akhenaton built for god Aton. These stones are called talatat, and they were rearranged in their original sequence and displayed in Luxor Museum. These two pylons are ruined. The 10th one was the last one built in this direction, and thus it represents the southern front of the temple. In front of it, King Horemheb built an avenue of sphinxes going south to reach the gate of King Ptolemy Philadelphos in front of the temple of Goddess Mut in Asher. The continuous tireless efforts in digging and cleaning and restoring the buildings of Karnak over the years resulted in the exploration of countless important monuments, some of which are thousands of stones used as fillings inside the 3rd pylon of Amenophis III and taken from over 10 temples, and the most bizarre finding of the great work of Akhenaton in Karnak. The Temple of Aton in Karnak was composed of a collection of open courts filled with offering tables beside the sacred chapels of Aton. They were preceded by a giant pylon and were lined up on one axis. Aton Temple was consecrated for the sun and its rays, so it was totally open to the sky with no ceiling, resembling the earliest temples of the cult of the sun when Ra was dominating. It comprised no sanctuary, which was a main part of any other temple. That's because there was no statue of a god to be placed within it. Thus, this temple was unique in its kind, order, and design. The excavations and archaeological researches in the east of Karnak confirmed that the temples constructed by King Amunhotep IV, known as Akhenaton, were destroyed after his death, apparently by King Horemheb, who had ordered the dismantling of the stones of Aton temples in Karnak and burying them inside his 3 pylons, the 2nd, the 9th, and the 10th. Monsieur Maurice Pillet, the manager of Karnak excavations at its time, estimated the number of stones used in the colonnade to be not less than 169,700 blocks of Akhenaton stones. The stones were used in filling pylons and as bases to constructions made by successor pharaohs. The digging out of the stones led to important discoveries, including the giant alabaster blocks of Amenophis II temple and the red sandstones of Hatshepsut chapel and the block granite of Thutmose III gate, in addition to alabaster stones belonging to Thutmose III and IV and Amenophis I. These stones were found inside the third pylon of Amenophis III and in the colonnade of Horemheb and Seti I and Ramesses II. They were reassembled and displayed in their original form in the Open Museum of Karnak. The excavations in Karnak temple revealed 2 giant statues of Akhenaton and fragments of 15 other grand statues of him. They constituted the front parts of a collection of Osirid statues belonging to a grand open court in Karnak. The excavated stone blocks of Aton temples in Karnak has reached 60,000 blocks, known as talatat. They are small stone blocks made of sandstone that was cut out of Silsila mountain south to Edfu. Each block had a height of 52 centimeters and a width of 26 centimeters and a height of 22 centimeters. A great project was held aiming at reassembling one of the walls of Aton temple. Successfully, its work is displayed now in Luxor Museum. The scenes on the walls are very interesting, for they describe the daily life scenes which took place in the temple, starting by the main rituals performed by the king and the queen for god Aton. Akhenaton is seen showering by the rays of Aton, which ends by hands carrying the key of life. He is followed sometimes by the queen, who offers bread for the sun god. The king also offers god Ra-Hur-Akhti some flowers, knowing that this god was favorable by Akhenaton before he dedicated himself to the cult of Aton. The scenes show in details the workers bringing food and beverages to the temple to be used as offerings to the gods. The reliefs are so colorful and dynamic and exquisitely done. Ironically, the act of the destruction of god Aton temple, performed by King Horemheb, was meant to preserve the stones in an excellent condition, helping to imagine how all the constructions of the temple used to look like. The excavations of Aton temple helped us to conclude that the constructional work done by Akhenaton in Karnak was on a much bigger and wider scale than it was thought to be, and that he had actually contributed as his ancestors and successors in turning Karnak into the most important living record and glorious monument in the world.
This is the sacred lake of Karnak Temple. That's where the priests used to take a swim in the early morning to be totally purified before they started their services daily. The high priest of the temple used also to take kind of a swim so that when he enters the sanctuary to meet the god, he has to be totally clean and purified.
Karnak Temple's buildings were constructed on 60 acres of land and over 2,000 years of the history of Egypt. Yet they all compose together elements of a one-unit temple, starting by the Avenue of Rams in front of the first pylon and going through the main axis to reach the sanctuary, then ending by the sacred lake. Right behind the sixth pylon of the temple and towards the east lies the sacred lake, which was a basic element in any temple in Egypt. Here, the priests washed themselves by swimming in the lake in the early morning before performing any rituals. That's why it's surrounded by steps, which enable the descending into the lake. A garden and kiosks for changing clothes were there too. The remainings are still there, turning the whole area into an oasis amidst the stone buildings and under the sun. The lake was also used during celebrations, when sacred boats sailed on its fresh Nile water, carrying the golden statues of Ammon, the sun god. A local story tells that a golden boat is still seen floating on its surface on lunar nights. Beside the lake, a giant statue of a scarab is found. It's cut out of one block of granite and belongs to King Amun-Hotep III. It represents God Khepiri, who is the sun, in the early hours of the morning. On its base is a scene of the king kneeling in front of God Atum, the god of Heliopolis, and offering him some wine, asking him for eternity. The original location of this statue is a funerary temple of King Amenophis III in the west bank of Luxor, behind the Colossi of Memnon, and was brought here after the destruction of the temple.